today I'm going to walk through how to make this multi-way jumpsuit. You will have seen clips of all the different ways that you can wear the neckline. This is one of my more difficult patterns. I've still tried to keep it as beginner friendly as possible, but it is just a tiny bit trickier than most of my patterns nearly are, but hopefully it should still be doable for most beginners. I've made the pattern available on my Etsy, and I think that's everything, so let's get on with the tutorial. So for this project, I would recommend a 4-way stretch fabric. This is a cotton jersey. I normally look for anything that is 95% cotton, 5% elastane, something around that composition. You could also use a woven fabric if you really wanted to. You would just have to size up, add some kind of fastening, so maybe a zip down the back, and you might also want to add darts to the top to make it fit a little bit better. The pattern is made for stretch fabric, but you could definitely make it with woven as well. You will also need some pins, some fabric scissors or something to cut out your pattern pieces, some fabric pens or something to draw out your pattern pieces. You will need some interfacing like this that's in these kind of ribbons for hemming the bottom of your trousers, and this is optional, but I would highly recommend a loop turner. This is going to make it easier to make the cords that you need to put through the top. I just found these on Amazon. In terms of my sewing machines, I'm going to be using an overlocker a lot, but wherever I use that, you can just use a regular machine with zigzag stitch, and I will also just be using a regular zigzag stitch as well on a normal machine. In terms of the pattern, I have 5 pattern pieces in total, so I've got 2 for the top, got 1 for the front of the top, and 1 for the back of the top. I have my piece for the front of the trousers, which I've just folded in half because I don't think it will fit on the camera, but it looks something like this. I also have the piece for the back of the trousers, which folded looks like this. And then finally, I also have my 5th pattern piece, which is my pocket. So I'm going to go ahead and cut all of my pieces out off camera, and then I'll show you what I've got in each piece. Because it's a 4-way stretch fabric, you can cut this in any orientation that you like. I'm just going to quickly walk through how you might change the length of these if you feel like you need to, because for example, for me, they are way too long, so I need to take them up a little bit. So the 2 ways that you can do this, either I just like to hold them up against myself and see how much needs to be taken off. Normally I'll put a dot about where my ankle is, and then you could just cut that area off, but there is another way that you can do it. Or you can just measure from your waist down to your ankle or down to where you want them to end, and then compare that to the measurement just straight down the centre here and take off as much as you need. So like I said, you can just put a dot, and then I like to measure. So for example, say my dot is here, and that's how much I need to take off. That is 5 inches. So I would just measure 5 inches along this bottom edge. Check you can actually see that. Let's move it over this way slightly. So I'll just measure 5 inches along the length of this bottom edge, and then you can match them all up and get a similar shape to the bottom here. So you would just draw that in. The other way that you can do it, which is quite often how I do it because it means you don't have to cut anything and risk ruining the pattern. And the other point on that is always make it slightly longer than you think that you need, because you can always take it up more with your hem, rather than making it too short to start with. So the way that I normally like to take something up, or you can also do this to make something a bit longer, is to just draw in this bottom hem. And then if you want to take it up, you're going to pull it this way as far as you need. So if it was 5 inches, you might pull it down to there, and then you just draw the rest of your trousers in. If you wanted to add length, you would send it in the other direction. Adding length is generally a little bit easier because at least you can see where your bottom line is here. So you would just pull this up this way and say this would add about 2 inches. So you can send it as far that way or pull it as far as you want this way to add or remove length. And then, like I said, you just draw in the rest of the trousers as you need to and just match up to this area here. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish cutting all my pieces out and then I'll show you what I've got. So for my top, for the front of my top, I've got 2 pieces. So you just want to cut 2 out from pattern piece 1, which is the front top, which should look something like this. For pattern piece 2, which is the back of the top, I have also got 2 pieces. And something that you need to pay attention to for this piece is that there is a guide on the actual pattern that shows you where you're going to attach the straps. So it'll just look something like this, and then you want to draw that onto both of your pieces for pattern piece 2. And then I also have my pocket pieces. I have 4 in total in my pocket pieces. As you can see, I've got 2 in this orientation facing this way and 2 in this orientation facing this way. This is to make sure that you've got 2 for each side of the jumpsuit. Now I've got a fabric here that doesn't have a right or wrong side. So this pocket could face this way and it could face this way. You can flip it and have it either way and it still works. But if you are using a fabric with a right and wrong side, you will need to make sure that you cut these out in the 2 opposite orientations. Even when I'm using a fabric like this that doesn't have a right or wrong side, I do tend to still cut them out like this just to get in the practice of making sure that I've got a pattern piece for each side. So 2 in each orientation for that one. And then I've also got 2 for pattern piece 4, I believe this is, which is the back of the trousers for the jumpsuit. This is one of the pieces that I've altered to make it a little bit shorter, and something that I would really recommend is to just leave a small mark like that on your back pieces so that you can easily identify the difference between the back pieces and the front pieces. Even though they are different, it can be easy to get mixed up. So I would recommend just putting a little mark on them. And this is the same thing as with the pockets, where you will need 1 in each orientation. So if you are using a fabric with a right and wrong side, you will need 1 facing in one direction and 1 facing in the other, just like that. And obviously, like I said before, mine can go in any direction, so it doesn't overly matter, but I still make sure to cut them out in this way. And just in case you're not sure how to get it in those 2 orientations, you would cut it out as it is here, as your normal pattern, and then just flip it. Just like this, so that you can then draw this way out and it will face in the other direction. And then finally, I also have my 2 pieces for the front of my trousers, which I believe is pattern piece 3. For this one, it's going to be exactly the same as the back of the trousers, where you'll just want 1 facing in each orientation. So it will just look like that. It will just look exactly the same as the pieces that you've got for the back. So now that I've finished cutting out all of my pattern pieces, I'm going to move on to making the straps for the top. I'm going to use exactly the same fabric that I've used for the jumpsuit, but the problem with doing that is that your straps will be a bit stretchy, because obviously this is a stretch fabric, which makes them a little bit less secure. So if you're not bothered about having your straps being exactly matching to the rest of your jumpsuit, which is why I'm going to use this one, you can find a fabric that is more or less the same colour but is a woven fabric. So I would recommend a cotton or a poly cotton, and you can do it in exactly the same way as I'm going to make these pieces, but just do it with a woven fabric instead if you want it to be a bit more secure. But if you want your straps to be exactly the same colour, you can do it like this and it will be fine. So I'm going to be cutting these pieces on a fold just to make them easier to work with. So I'm going to need to cut out 4 in total of these straps, 2 for the back and 2 for the front. And I'm going to want them to be about 20 inches in length, or that's about 51-52 centimetres. And I'm going to cut them on a fold, which means I need to cut them at about 10 inches, which is about 26 centimetres. So On a fold, I'm going to be cutting them at 26 centimeters. In terms of width, I want the finished strap to be about 1 centimeter. So I'm going to make the width of these pieces about 3 centimeters because that gives me enough space to be able to fold them and sew them down the edge and then cut off the excess. So I'm going to cut 4 of these out. I'm going to do them at 26 centimeters long and about 3 centimeters wide. If you want your straps to be longer, you can do that. If you want your straps to be thicker, you can also do that. It's completely up to you. So the first thing I'm going to do is just mark where 26 centimeters is here, and then I've just got the fold down here. I'm just going to draw a line where that 26 mark is. And then from that 26 line, I'm going to measure 3 centimeters. If you want to make this easier, you can just make it a little bit wider than you need, and then you can just cut off more excess. And I'm just going to draw that line from the 3 centimeters down to the fold, and then match that up at the end. I'm just going to repeat that for the next 3 as well. Now that I've got the 4 of these drawn out, I'm just going to go ahead and cut these out. So now that I've got all of my pieces cut out, I'm just going to fold this down the middle, and like I said, I'm going to make these 1 centimeter wide. You can see if I just measure that, got quite a lot of fabric here to do my seam allowance. And what I would recommend is to use these lines on your machine and find where 1 centimeter corresponds to. So I know that if I do it at the side of this gap here, it will be about 1 centimeter. So I've set my machine to a zigzag stitch, and you want to make sure that the closer of the points of the zigzag is sitting at the 1 centimeter mark. Otherwise, you're going to make this piece too small. So find whichever of the zigzag points is going to be closer to this fold and put that at your 1 centimeter mark. So mine is about here, and then I'm just going to sew straight down this edge with my zigzag stitch. And if you're using a woven fabric, you can just use a normal straight stitch, which will be a little bit easier. And just the whole time I'm keeping it lined up to one of the lines in my machine where I know it will make this 1 centimeter wide. So I've just finished sewing along that edge. I'm just going to go in and trim off any excess on the side of that seam. You'll have a lot more excess if you've used a woven fabric and a straight stitch. So I'm just going to trim off that tiny bit of excess. And also when you're sewing them, I forgot to mention, you want to make sure that you are reversing over the ends to make sure that it doesn't come undone. So I've just trimmed off the excess from this. Like I said, it is only a tiny amount, but it will just make it a little bit easier to turn it to the right side out. So to do that, I'm going to use my loop turner. So for that, you just push it onto here, hook it through the end, and then gently pull it through to the right side out. You can do the same kind of thing with a safety pin as well. So if you don't have a loop turner, you can just attach a safety pin on one end and then push it through and use the safety pin to pull this through to the right side out, but I would highly recommend getting one of these if you can. This is from Amazon. So now this is nearly done. I'm just going to close up one of the ends. You can do this with your machine if you want. So you just want to fold in the ends kind of like this, but straighter. And then sew over that with a straight stitch, but I prefer to do mine with a hand stitch. So for my hand stitch, I've just got a piece of thread with a knot in the end. I'm just going to put that into the end here where I've folded over those raw edges, and I'm essentially going to just do a ladder stitch here. So one stitch on one side of that fold. I'm just going to trim the knot off, and then one side in the opposite side of the fold. Just keep doing that along the length of that fold. Just trying to keep them as parallel as you can when you switch from one side to the other. The reason I prefer to do this over a machine is that I quite often find my machine gets stuck doing this. And I find that this is a little bit neater. And then once you've got to the other side, you can just tie that off. Then once this one is finished, you want to repeat that for your other 3 pieces so that you've got 4 straps in total. So once I have these 4 straps finished, I'm going to move on to making my top, and I'm going to start with this front piece. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to hem this top edge, and I want to aim to make this hem about 6 millimeters. So it's going to be quite thin. So I'm going to do it about this size. So I'm going to start by pressing that in place with my iron. I'm just going to take my iron and press that top edge in place. So that will look something like this once you've pressed it in place. And I'm just going to sew along that edge with a zigzag stitch just to secure it in place. So now that I've got that top edge sewn in place, I'm going to take these 2 pieces and lay them right sides facing together like so. And I'm just going to pin them in place around these armholes. Once they're pinned in place, I'm just going to go and sew those 2 edges in place with my overlocker. You can use a zigzag stitch if you don't have an overlocker. So now that I've got these armholes in place, I'm going to sew across this top edge. But first, I need to make a mark for where I'm going to have the channels that have the straps in them. So I'm going to measure 1.5 centimeters, and I'm going to measure this away from this seam. Just zoom in so you can see a little bit better. So you don't want to start the measurement from the edge. You want to start it from where the seam that you've sewn around the armhole ends. So then I'm just going to make a mark where that 1.5 centimeters is. I'm going to do that on the other side as well. So now between those 2 edges is where I need to sew this in place. I'm just going to place some pins along this top edge. And now that I've got those pins in place, I'm just going to sew along this top edge, stopping at this mark on each end because this is where our channels are going to be. So I'm just going to sew straight across here, just in this area here with my overlocker. As always, you can use a zigzag stitch as well. So I'm just going to take this first needle out so that I can line up this mark easier. So I'm just going to be lining up that mark to make sure that I've got this 1.5 centimeter gap. I'm going to put my foot down and lay the needle straight into that mark just to make sure I've got the right size hole at the end there. And then I'm just going to slowly follow along this edge. And then this bit will be easy if you're using a normal sewing machine to get it to stop on this mark. It's a bit trickier with an overlocker to be able to judge correctly. So I'm going to attempt to do it, but if I can't do it, I can just come in from the other side and do it exactly how I did it on the first stop. So I've gone just a little bit over, you can see, but I'm literally just going to unpick this tiny bit here. So I've just finished sewing along that top edge of the top, just leaving these sections open. I'm just going to turn this to the right side out. So that top edge should look something like this, and then you should have a hole here, and we're going to use that to create the channels that we're going to use for the straps. So now I'm going to go in with my regular machine and a zigzag stitch, and I'm just going to, all the way around here, just sew a zigzag stitch, and I'm going to try and aim to have that be 1.5 centimeters all the way around. If you have some tailor's chalk or anything that you can easily rub off, you can draw that line in just around here, just making sure it's 1.5 centimeters all the way around. I'm going to use the marks on my machine to make sure I'm measuring it at the right place. So I'll just show you how I'm going to do that. So I've just zoomed in on my machine so that you can see how I'm going to find the measurement that I need. So I want to put my needle to the position that's furthest this way, and then I'm going to use that to measure where 1.5 centimeters is, and it's against this line here. So that's this line, so I'm going to line that up with the edge of this armhole. So the edge lines up to that line there. The lines on the machine are very, very handy for making sure you're measuring correctly. And then I'm just going to start to sew around that armhole, keeping this edge lined up to this line here, which obviously you can't see now, but this is the line that I measured. I'm just going to push this round and make sure the edge is always in line with this armhole. I'm going to use my medium size of my zigzag stitch. If you want something that looks a bit neater or a bit more precise, you can also use a smaller zigzag if you want to, but this is the easiest zigzag that I find. So I'm just going to start to follow this round. I'm just going to zoom out slightly. I'm just making sure as I start that I go back and reverse over the end so that it secures it in place. And I've still got this edge of the armhole lined up to the mark that we found. I'm just reversing over that again. So that's your channel for one side of the armhole. I'm going to go in and repeat that for the other side as well. So now that you've got these channels sewn in place, I'm going to start to add my straps. So I'm going to use a safety pin to do this. You could also use your loop turner. I'm just going to pin through the raw end that I've got, the one that I didn't sew closed, and just start to thread that through. This will likely take a little while. I might also use my loop turner just to push it through a little bit. Just pulling that safety pin through a little bit at a time. Once you get past this bit at the top, it is a lot easier. Just going to zoom in to give you a bit of a better idea of exactly how I'm moving my hands with this. So I've got my safety clip in here, I'm just going to kind of gather the fabric over the safety pin, hold onto the safety pin, and then pull from the other side. And it might not feel like it's moving anywhere, but it's gradually getting to where you want it. And then you've got it there. So it looks like this currently. I'm just going to tie a loose knot in this end for now. I'm going to undo that soon, but just while I'm adding the other strap, I'm going to knot that on. So now I'm just going to go and repeat that for the other side. So that's how this will look once you've added both of your straps. Just make sure to take your time and kind of gather it over the safety pin, and you will get there eventually. Now I'm going to put this piece to one side just for the time being. So now moving on to the back of my top, I've got both of my back pieces here. I'm just going to fold one of them up, and I've also got two of my strap pieces. So I'm going to take the piece that I haven't sewn shut. If you did end up sewing both of them shut, it won't really matter. And I'm just going to place it over that mark that I drew in place. And then just pin that in place for now. I'm going to do the same with the other side. So I've just got my mark here that tells me where I want to attach my straps. I'm just going to attach that open end and pin it in place. Now I'm going to take this other piece and place it right sides facing together. Obviously my fabric doesn't have a right and wrong side, but if yours does, it needs to be right sides facing together, and then to just pin right along that top edge. So once you've pinned this strap in place, so you want to pin through the back layer of the fabric, the strap, and the front layer, then you can take the initial pin out that you put through that strap. And then again on this side, to go through the back piece, through the strap, and then through the front piece. And then you can take out this pin that you put in initially. And then just finish off that line. And then I'm going to sew across that edge, making sure that I get the straps in that stitch. With my overlocker, you can also use a zigzag stitch. So this is how that will look once you've sewn across that top edge. And if you were to turn it to the right side out, it would just look like this with your straps securely attached within that seam. I'm just going to turn this back to the wrong side out, and then I'm going to grab my front piece that we've already made. So now I'm going to be attaching these two pieces together. So I'm going to fold this piece down slightly, and I'm going to place this side inside the back piece. Now the back piece should be inside out, the front piece should be the right way out. So I'm just going to lift up one of these pieces and place my front piece inside here, and then just place that piece of fabric back over the top. And now I need to line up all of my edges and pin down this side. So now is the time to undo these knots that I've got at the side. In fact, I'm just going to go in and pull this strap so it's not quite as long on this end. So now I want to pin down this side seam. I want to make sure that I get this strap that is hanging out at the side within those pins. So that's how my side seam looks once it's all pinned in place. I'm just going to repeat that for the other side, and then when I go in and sew this, I'm going to be using an overlocker, so I'll just be able to chop this off as I'm sewing. But if you're using a normal sewing machine with a zigzag stitch, you can just sew your zigzag stitch in place and then trim this off at the end. So either way, I would recommend just leaving a little bit of excess sticking out because it makes it a lot more easy to make sure that it's secure within that seam. So I've just finished pinning it down the other side. So now, like I said, I'm just going to sew down each of these with my overlocker and just chop this off as I go. Just make sure that you get all 4 layers of fabric. You've got 4 layers on each side, and you also want to make sure that you include this strap here as well. So this is how that looks once both of the side seams are sewn in place. So then you can turn this piece to the right side out and it will be starting to look more like a top. So it will be looking something like this. I'm just going to put this piece to one side while I make the trousers. So then moving on to the trousers, I'm going to start with the front of the trousers. I'm going to lay them one on top of the other with right sides facing together. Just match those edges up. I'm going to pin around this curve here. So then, now that you've got this edge pinned in place, you can go in and sew that with an overlocker or a zigzag stitch. Or I am also going to add my pockets now, just because it makes it a little bit quicker. So I'm going to take 2 of my pocket pieces. I'm going to start with just one of them. And I'm going to line this straight edge up to the straight edge of the shorts and the top of the pocket to the top edge of the shorts. You can see that, and as always this would be right sides facing together. I'm just going to pin down that edge and just repeating that with my second pocket. So now I'm just going to go and sew both of those straight edges with my overlocker. Again, you can use a zigzag stitch, and then I'm also going to sew this curved edge in place as well. So I've sewn my pockets in place, and I've also sewn this curved edge in place. And then I've gone in and repeated those same steps for the back of my trousers, so that now I have 2 very similar pieces. So I'm going to lay them right sides facing together. I just want to start to pin these together. So I'm going to be pinning along the top of this pocket, around the pocket, down this side of the trousers, up and down the centre, and then the same on the other side. So I'm going to get everything pinned in place and then sew everything in place as well with my overlocker. As always, you can use a zigzag stitch, and then I'm going to lay everything out on the floor so you can see a little bit better where I have sewn. So this is how that looks once I've sewn the 2 pieces of the trousers together. So I've sewn along the top of the pocket here, not along any of this area, just the top of the pocket, around the pocket and down this side, and then straight up and round the centre crotch area, and then again across and round the pocket and down on this side, and then you will have your trousers pretty much in one piece. So now I can open up these trousers and I'm going to place my top inside. Now I just need to make sure I know which side is the back. So I have sewn the seam over the marks that I left, but I can still just about see them to know that this is the back of my trousers. So I need to line up this top so that the back of the top lines up to the back of the trousers. And here I want the top to be the right way out and the trousers to be inside out. I'm just going to place my top in there, and then I'm going to start to pin that in place. So I'm going to start by pinning the side seam of the top to the side seam of the trousers, and then I'm just going to do that side seam on the other side as well. The side seam of the top to the side seam of the trousers, and then I'm just going to pin the rest of the way around. So that's how that waistband will look with the top attached. Now I'm just going to take my pockets and add that to the layers that I've got in place. I'm just going to use the pins that I've already got. So I'm literally just folding the pocket this way and including it with the waistband and the top, just like that. I'm going to do that on the other side as well. Just taking those pins out and putting them back in through all of the layers. So now you've got your pins pinned in place like that. So I'm just going to sew around this edge with my overlocker. You can also use a zigzag stitch. You want to make sure you get all 3 layers all the way around, and then also the extra pocket at these sections as well. So here you've got 3 layers of fabric and a pocket on top of that. Just make sure that you can probably see how that works. So this is how that will look once it's all sewn in place. You can see I've got my pockets sewn in place as well, and I'm going to turn this to the right side out. So you can see it is starting to look like the end result of the jumpsuit now. There's just a few more things to do. So the first one is to hem the bottom edge of these trousers. So the way I would recommend doing that is to just take your interfacing. I'm going to just cut this straight down the middle, so I've got some thinner pieces to work with. So I'll just start with this piece for now, and I'm going to place that on this bottom edge, and then I'm going to fold that bottom edge up over the interfacing and then press that in place. So I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way around both of the trousers, just around that bottom edge. Just taking my interfacing, folding the fabric up over it and pressing it in place, and then I'll show you how it looks afterwards. So this is how that should look once it's all pressed in place. Now I'm just going to follow that fold around with a zigzag stitch just to secure it in place. I'm going to do that around the bottom of both of the legs. So that's how my hem looks once I've added my zigzag stitch, and then your jumpsuit is done. The only other thing that you might want to do is to add some top stitch. So the place that I would most recommend adding a top stitch is just to connect that channel there into the back piece. So you could just follow this with your zigzag stitch, but other than that, I don't really think you need top stitching anywhere else, and I think I'm just going to leave mine as it is because I am lazy and I don't want to do any more sewing today. But if you do want to add it, I would just recommend adding it just along that back panel. But other than that, the jumpsuit is finished.